We begin today the Gemara on Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis, 4 lines up from the bottom of the Yamud. The Gemara is discussing what is the source of the halacha of the Mishnah that in order to establish a chazakah in a karka, and that means in order to have a proof that this karka is yours, you'll be the presumptive owner even without showing a shtar that you bought the karka. So the Mishnah says chazakah is 3 years. Why 3 years? So the Gemara before brought that Hoilchei Usha said that this is learnt out from Sheira Muad. After it gores 3 times, it changes from the status of a tam to a muad. Similar here. But the Gemara proved that according to this, it shouldn't have to be 3 years. It can be much shorter than 3 years. The Gemara brought an example from aspasta that grows in 30 days, that you can make a chazakah just over 3 months. Or by orchard, where you have different trees. If you have a vine, figs, and olives, you can make a chazakah just by one season or a couple of months where you do the work and you're eating from the 3 different kinds of trees in this field. So the Gemara says that this is true. According to Rabbi Shmuel in our Mishnah, that learns it from Sheira Muad, Rabbi Shmuel was from the Hoilchei Usha, the chazakah does not have to be 3 years. But the Gemara here now asks, L'Rabbanan Mai, the Rabbanan that disagree with Rabbi Shmuel, and they hold that the chazakah does have to be 3 years. And this opinion of the Rabbanan, according to Rashi, is not brought in our Mishnah, but the Gemara later on Daf Lamed Vav will bring the opinion of the Rabbanan. So according to their opinion, what is the source of the fact that the chazakah has to be 3 years if it can't be learned from Sheira Muad? Okay, so the Gemara brings another source here. It's like the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, that we can learn it from the pasuk that it says regarding before the churban of the first Beis Hamikdash. Kroksiv, there the pasuk says that this is a nevuah that Yirmiyah was prophesying about the churban that will take place. This was at the end of the kingdom of Tzidkiyahu. This is in the 10th year of the kingdom of Tzidkiyahu, and because Yirmiyah was prophesying about the churban, they placed him into a prison cell. And then he said, Sadais bakesef yiknu, you should buy fields with money, and v'kasav baseife v'chasav, and you should make sure that you should document this in a document. So why is he warning them that you should have a document for this sale? So the point of his nevuah was that even though the Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed, and Yidden are going to be expelled from Eretz Yisrael, but he's telling them a nevuah that the Yidden are going to return. After 70 years, they're going to return from Golus, so they should buy properties now, so that when they come back, they'll have those properties that they bought, and they'll have documentation to prove that it's theirs. So now what do we see here? He's emphasizing specifically that they should have documentation for this. Shahrei Navi Oimid Be'esed. The Navi Yirmiyah is saying this. He's standing in the 10th year, in the beginning of the 10th year of Tzidkiyahu's kingdom. Umazir al Achas Esra. And he's warning them and saying that the churban will take place after the 11th year, at the end of the 11th year, which means that they're only going to have 2 years to occupy that field that they'll buy. And because only 2 years, so therefore they'll have to have a shtar to prove that it belongs to them. So from this you see that 2 years, if you're there in the property, you still need your shtar. But if it would be 3 years, so then after 3 years, you don't need that shtar anymore. So Abaye asks on this proof, Dilme Hasam, how do you know that he's saying this as a halacha that 2 years you still need a shtar and the 3rd year you don't? Maybe he's just saying here as a good advice that they should hold on to the shtar even if they would be there for 3 years, or even if 2 years would be a chazakah, but it's still good advice to have a shtar. Because if you're relying on a chazakah, so then you're going to have to find witnesses. When you come back to Eretz Yisrael after 70 years, you're going to have to find witnesses that can testify for you that you were there for those 2 or 3 years. So rather have a shtar with you so you don't have to rely on any witnesses that you don't know if they're alive still or they're going to be there or not. So you should have a shtar. But he's just saying this as good advice. It's not being said here as a source as for halacha, how long the chazakah should be, 2 years or 3 years. If you're not going to say so, that Yirmiyah is prophesying and just giving good advice. So here the Gemara points out that there's another nevuah there that Yirmiyah says that's clearly being said just as good advice. Yirmiyah says, Banu Batim, this is actually a nevuah to those that had already been exiled to Bavel. The Yidden were exiled to Bavel in stages, and there were those that went down to Bavel earlier on. And he tells them in Bavel, Banu Batim, build yourself houses, vishu, and sit in them, v'notu ganais, plant gardens, v'achlu espirion, and eat from the fruits. So he's telling them that we're not leaving Bavel so quickly. We're going to be in Bavel for a long period of time, for 70 years. So he's giving them an eitzah to take care of themselves there. My karma, what was he teaching them? What halacha, what is he telling them over here they should do this for? So Ella, the answer is Eitz Tova Kamashmalon. He's just giving them good advice of what they should be doing there in Bavel. Hachanami Eitz Tova Kamashmalon. Here as well, the detail that it says that they should write this in a document is not being said as a halacha that because it's less than 3 years, so therefore you have no proof other than the shtar. Even if you do have proof, he's still saying in Eitz Tova that it's better to have documentation. Teida, the Gemara says, now I'll prove it to you here regarding this point of writing it into the shtar, that the whole point was just for an Eitz Tova, the chsiv, because the pasuk says, "V'nesatem b'kli cheres," take this documentation and put it into an earthenware vessel, l'manyam de yomim rabim, so that it should last for a long time. That you should have it there even after the Yidden will come back. They'll have this documentation. What is he saying this for? Is this expressing a certain halacha? No, he's saying this just as an Eitz Tova, where that in an earthenware vessel, that's a good place to hide your documents. So therefore, there's no proof from this nevuah of Yirmiyah for the halacha of Cheskas Gimel Shanim. So the question remains, according to the Rabbanon, what's the source that Chazakah is 3 years? Elo Amar Rave. So therefore, Rave says we can say that the svara is as follows: Shata Kamaisa. The first year that a person goes into someone's property and he lives there, he's occupying the field and he's eating from the fruits. Machal Inish. The original owner would be Meichel this. He could forgive the fact that someone is eating and using his property. Let's say you have someone that owns a field, but he has more than one field and he's planting in a different place. And this field there, he's leaving empty. He's not using it now. So someone else comes and goes into your property and plants there and eats fruits there. So if someone does that for 1 year, he'll be Meichel the fruits. Tarti Machal. 2 years also he'll be Meichel. Tlas, however, if someone's going to be in your field for 3 seasons, for 3 years, then le Machal. You're not going to be Meichel the fruits that he's eating there. So therefore the fact that he's allowing you to be there all this time is a proof that he probably sold it to you. That's why he's not speaking up. So it's the fact that this length of time, the fact that he was quiet this time, that itself is the proof that when you claim that he sold it to you, it's true. But before that though, before 3 years, a person is meichel on the paytas that someone eats and works and does in his field. So therefore that's not a proof. That's the reason for 3 years. That's the nature of a person. So Abaye says, Ela Meyata, if this is the basis of the chazakah of 3 years, so now ki hadra ara, what happens if it's a case where a person couldn't prove that he was there for 3 years straight without the original owner challenging his occupation of the field? If the original owner made a macha, he protested your being there during this time, and therefore you can't establish a chazakah. So what should be the halacha here? So now according to what you're saying, if you were there for less than 3 years, ki hadra, now when you're going to be forced to return this property to that owner, that original owner, you can't prove that you bought it from him, to had the labar meperi. You should return it to him, and you shouldn't have to give him back the value of the fruits that you planted and ate during this time. Because what the svara that Rav is saying is, if you're occupying a field for less than 3 years, the original owner is meichel that. And that's the reason why it was quiet. So why Alama Omer Rav Nachman? Why did Rav Nachman say? This is later here in a few blocks later in the Pedic here. Hadra Ara, the Hadra Pedi. That in a case where a person could only bring eidos, that he was in the property for 2 years, so then he's going to have to return the property to the original owner that has proof that he owned it before. You can't prove that you bought it from him, and you also have to give back all the fruits that you ate during this time. So you see that this is not true, that the original owner is not meichel, that for someone that comes and lives in your property and uses and plants there, he's not going to be meichel these paytas. So what's the source of the chazakah being 3 years?
He's giving back the paytas after 3 years or
after
2 years?
After 2 years. After 2
years.
years.
Because he was meichel.
Again?
Because he was meichel.
No, so even if the person was not meichel, after 2 years, if you could only prove that you were there for 2 years, even if the original owner wasn't meichel, if you could only prove you were there 2 years, you have to give back the karka and the paytas, because you can't. 2 years is not a chazakah. Why is it not a chazakah? Because the fact that he was not meichel means nothing. It's just that he was meichel, so therefore it doesn't prove that you bought it. But if that's the point though, that he was meichel, so then why are you giving back the paytas? You have to give back the karka, but why give back the paytas? Elo Amar Rave, so Rav answers and explains it a little bit differently. Shata Kamaisa, if you're in someone's field and you're occupying it, even if you didn't buy it for 1 year, the kopedinish. He's not going to be meichel on the paytas that you're eating. Whatever produce you get out of this field, he wants it from you. He wants you to return it to him. But he's not going to be makpid the fact that you're a squatter, that you're there occupying his field. Tarti lekopid. After 2 years, he's also not makpid. Tlas kapid, when you're in someone's field, after 3 years, here he's going to be particular about this. What are you doing in my field? So over here, the fact that after 3 years he's not speaking up, that in itself, the fact that he wasn't meiche against you being in his field, is the biggest proof that he probably sold it to you. That's the raya. So it's not doesn't go to the extent of mechila. He's talking not meichel. But first and second year, you're busy with another field, and someone else is just moving into your field, which is empty. You're not going to be makpid. But after 3 years, over here, you're going to be makpid. So why were you quiet? So the shtik, the fact that you were quiet this time, that's the proof. Abaye, so now based on this, Abaye asks a question. Here, the Gemara, as you see here, after this point in Masechta Bava Basra, you don't have Rashi anymore. So Atkam Pirish Rashi is Tzal. In other Pirushim, it said that here Rashi passed away, and after this is the Rashbam, which is a grandson of Rashi, the continuation of the whole Masechta, and because of this, Bava Basra is the longest Masechta, because the Rashbam is double or even 3 or 4 times as long as Rashi in every part of the Gemara. So, okay, let's go forward. So the Gemara says, Abaye asks Rava on this reason as well. Ela Mayata. If this is the reason why, the basis of the Chazakah of 3 years, that it's based on the nature of a person, that he's not makbid until 3 years, Kogoyin Hani de Be'al Yashiv. How about these people that are by the Be'al Yashiv? The Kopti. They are very makbid, they're very particular. Even on someone that just walks by the border of their property. And just for one moment, they right away scream and they right away makbid. So Hachanami, so if so, are you going to say the La'altar have a chazakah? That by their properties, if someone occupies the field just for 1 minute, it should be immediately a chazakah. The point here is that it's a svara. That why were you quiet and you allowed me to occupy your field? Okay, so how could you give the share of 3 years? For some people, the share could be 1 minute, like these people of Be'al Yashiv. And for other people, it may actually be even longer. The point over here is that you can't give one share for all people that it's with the same nature that everyone has, the nature that after 3 years a person is makbid. Now, if you'll say that, so the share of 3 years is takalav dafka 3 years. It can be according to every person what his nature is. But if that's the case, then this whole share of 3 years is not 3 years. It's going to be different for every person. And Chazal are not going to be misakin. It doesn't make sense that you should say that the chazaka on a karka is different for every single person. So hello, Marov. So therefore, Rav again retracted and said that the pshat over here is, what's the basis of the chazaka of 3 years? Shata kamaisa, the first year that a person is in a property, mizdayir inish b'shtore. He bought this property and he has a shtar that he bought it. So he's careful with his shtar. He's afraid that someone may come to challenge his ownership of this field. So he keeps his shtar. Tarti, a second year, he also keeps his shtar. Tarti, the second and third year, mizdayir. He's careful with his shtar. Tfei, but after 3 years, loy mizdar. He's not careful with his shtar anymore. So therefore, the first 3 years, a person has his shtar, so the only way you can prove your ownership is by showing that shtar. Otherwise, there's a question on you, where is your shtar? But after 3 years, a person sees that he's here in the field and he's using it normally like every person that owns it, and nobody challenges ownership. So now he's not so careful with his shtar, he loses his shtar. So therefore, after 3 years, he can't prove his ownership with the shtar. The way to prove his ownership is by the fact that he was there for 3 years. So all the Rishonim discuss here in this Gemara, but what is the actual proof though? We're explaining why after 3 years he doesn't have necessarily the proof of the shtar anymore. He doesn't keep a shtar. But what is though this svara? What is the basis of the proof that this field is his after 3 years? So from Rashi and Ksubis and from the Rosh it's mashma that the pshat of the Gemara is saying is it's a takanas chachamim. That because this is the nature of people that it's hard to keep a document forever. So therefore, a person loses it after 3 years. Chachamim were masakin that after 3 years, being in the karka in itself will be a source and a proof that it belongs to you. It's not a logical proof, but it's a takanas chachamim that after 3 years you can establish a chazaka. You establish a chazaka, and at the same time, though, the original owner is given the right to be meiche. If you don't want someone else to become a muhsik, to be in this position that now he doesn't have to show any documentation that it is, you have the right to be meicha against that. That's one pshat, that's Rashi's pshat. The Ramban later here in the Pedic says that this answer of Rava is really connected to the previous answer. And the previous answer had explained that the basis of the chazaka is that if someone's occupying your field and you're being quiet, why are you being quiet? The truth is that even after one moment, someone goes into your house, into your field, you shouldn't be quiet, as the Gemara said before. So Elamai, why are we saying that svara only is after 3 years? Because until 3 years, even though you have a raya that you bought the field, because otherwise, why was the original owner quiet? But there's also a big question on you. If you actually bought it, where's your star? Every field is usually bought with a star. So therefore, to get rid of that big question on you, we wait until after 3 years. After 3 years, we don't have a question on you anymore. Where's your star? Because it's the nature of people to lose it. So therefore, now we go back to that svara. If so, I do have a proof that it's mine because you weren't meicha. You were quiet when I was here in this field. So this reason is really connected to the previous reason. It's just explaining why we wait until 3 years. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye asked on this reason, Ela meyata. If this is the case, that after 3 years a person loses his star, why? Because he's in the field and it's unchallenged, no one that was ever meiche, so then he doesn't feel that there's any reason for him to hold on to the star. So if so, macha shalei b'fanav lo yitavim macha. If the original owner wants to protest against you occupying his field, so if it's not in your presence, that macha should not be good. Why? Because the person occupying the field should say to him, you were on another side of the world, or you were in a different place and you were meicha against me. I didn't know. If you would be meicha in my face, right? When I know about this, then I would be careful with the star. The whole point of here is that he loses the star because nobody protested against him. So even when he does protest, but if you didn't hear about it, or you could claim you didn't hear about it, so then it should be a good macha as well. So the Gemara answers, no, that this is not true, because, and the Gemara already said this svara before on Daf Chav Ches, Chavra Islay, your friend has a friend, Chavra Islay, and your friend's friend also has a friend, and therefore, if I'm meiche somewhere else, then the message gets back to you, and you should have heard about the fact that I was meiche, and you should have held on to your star. So therefore, any macha anywhere, even not in the presence of the person being machzik, will be a valid macha to stop your chazaki. You should still have to be careful with your star. Okay, so this is the conclusion of the Gemara. The source of Cheskas Gimel Shanim, according to the Rabbanon, this svara of that after 3 years a person loses his star. Amar Ravuna said about the chazaka of 3 years. Shalosh shanim shamru, the 3 years that was said, that's what establishes your proof that the field is yours. Hu sha'achlan ritzufais. That's only if you're there in the field 3 years consecutively. You can't be in the year 1 year, and then 1 year you leave, and 1 year you come back, and then 1 year you leave and you come back. The first, third, and fifth year, it's not going to work. It has to be 1, 2, and 3. So the practical Gemara, what's the chiddush of Rav Huna? Tanina, didn't we learn this in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, Chaskasan, Shalosh shanim miyom l'yom. The chazaka is 3 years. One day after the other has to be 3 full years. So you see clearly in the Mishnah that it has to be the tzufais. Answers the Gemara, I would think in the lashon of the Mishnah, the Mishnah was saying that it has to be 3 full years, day to day. And this is here, the Gemara is quoting the Mishnah that it says by the Beis Habal, a field that only relies on, this is the field actually that is the Beis HaShlochin, right, which has a water canal that it can be watered all the time, so you can plant it every day of the year. So you have to be there every day of the year. That's coming to exclude Mekutais, that it's not 3 full years. You were there part of the time for 1 year, part of the time of another year, it's Mekutais. But I would think that this could still be Mefuzares, that it's spread out. It was the first year, a 3rd year, and a 5th year. It doesn't have to be consecutive. Kamash Malon, therefore Rav Huna is teaching and saying the additional chiddush that it has to be 3 years, one after the other. But Rav Chama says in this, Rav Huna though will agree, the Asra, the Maivri Bagi. If it's a place that the people in this valley, their custom is that they don't plant every year. They leave the field empty for 1 year. As we'll see soon in the Gemara, many times it's good for the field, for the soil, not to be used year after year, and they would keep it empty. 1 year plant, 1 year empty. So in such a case, it'll be a chazakah, even if it's not a tzufais. So even though you're going to have to establish a chazakah only over the 3 years that you're actually planting, that year that you're keeping it empty, it does not combine to the time that your chazakah is established. But the chazakah does not have to be consecutive. In fact, the Gemara Pshita, it's obvious that if that's the way they use the field, that they keep it empty for 1 year, so of course it's you're not doing different than anybody else, it should be a chazakah. Says the Gemara, the Chiddush of Rav Chama over here was the Ikke the Moiver, Vike the Loy Moiver. In this valley, there are those that keep the field empty for a year, and those that don't. And here this person kept it empty for a year. So now the Taime, I would think the Bachirad's Matzi Amalei, the original owner that's now protesting against you and saying, I never sold it to you, he can say to him, Im Isa dididachavai, if this field is actually yours, you should have planted it every single year. If you're trying to establish a chazakah, if you're trying to prove that this field is yours, so then you should be planting it every single year to show that you're using it and you're eating from the field like a normal person that buys a property. And only then, over 3 years, that you planted it 1 year after the next, and I'm quiet, I wasn't meiche, that would be proof that it's yours. But if not, if you plant it 1 year and you keep it empty the other year, so then you should be thinking, you know why the original owner was quiet about this? Because he can say, look, I saw you came 1 year and you left another year. So that means that you were just a Ghana for 1 year, but then you decided to leave. That's why I didn't protest against you. So Kamash Malan, therefore he's saying, the Amalei, that the one that's occupying the field here says to the original owner, that no, you can't say that I should have been planting all this time in order for you to be meiche. If you want to say that it's not mine, because if I'm going to be the one that's going to be planting and my neighbors around me are not planting in this area, that means that I'm going to have to hire guards myself on my field, and I can't do it together with other people, so I can't afford this. Or he could argue and say that it's better for the field to leave it empty a year, because then the soil gets a rest and it produces better. So therefore I'm using the field in the best way, and you can't come and argue and say, oh, I saw you left after a year, so therefore I wasn't meiche. No, this is the best way to use the field, like other people here in this valley, and therefore you should have been meiche against me. Tanan, in the Mishnah it said, Cheskas Habatim, that the first case of the Mishnah was that there's a chazaki you can establish by being 3 years in a house. And that's 3 full years in the house. But the question is, how exactly do you prove that you were in a house for 3 years? When it comes to a house, the biyamame yadi belela lo yadi. During the daytime, you can bring edim that see that you were there in the house. But by night, how do you have edim during the night? It's pitch dark every single night, that you have edim that are there that can come and testify that you were in the house all night. Maybe you weren't at the house at night. Maybe you left during the night. So how could you ever prove that you have? How could you prove your chazakah? So now, the question of the Gemara here is, when it comes to a field that's only used during the day, so you don't have to bring Eidim that you were on your field day and night. You just have to have Eidim that you were there planting and working in the field during the day. But over here, though, since we're talking about a house, this is a question of Rav Huna. Rav Huna says that you have to be there at Tzufais. You have to be there 3 years. You can't come and go. Can't do the first, third, and fifth year. So the same thing over here, even within 1 year, you can't be there only by day and not by night, and then maybe we would establish the chazakah over 6 years. If it was not for what Rav Huna said, then there wouldn't be a question here, because then you would say, well, maybe you could establish the chazakah over 6 years, just by being in the house every single day. But since Rav Huna says you can't spread out the chazakah that way, it has to be consecutive, so that means it has to be every day and every night the way a house is usually used, only over 3 years. So the question is, how do you bring Eidim that you were there every night? Abaye says, Man masad abatim. Who is testifying when you're occupying someone's house that you actually bought it, that this is your house? Who's going to who's going to be the Eidim for you? Shivavi, it's the neighbors. Shivavi meidi yodi. The neighbors could testify that you were there by day and by night. In other words, the Chiddush of Abaye is, even if the neighbors don't actually see 3 o'clock in the morning that you were there, but the fact that the neighbors see that you were there by day, that they can clearly see. And then by night they see that you're there, that they don't see you leaving, they don't see you moving out. If you had furniture in the house, they don't see you by night taking out the furniture, they don't hear any commotion. So even though they don't mamish see you there every moment of the night, but that's enough of it is that they know that you were there by day and by night. Rava says, Kagain, there's another way he can bring Eidus that he was there all the time. The also Beitrei, when 2 Eidim come, Va'amri, and they say, Anan agrinan minei. We are renters. We rented from this person that's claiming that he bought it from you. And we as renters from this person live there day and night. So they're testifying about themselves that they were there day and night for 3 years. Rav Yem asks Rav Ashi about this. How could you accept this Eidus? When they testify this, they're negay Eidus. They're impartial. They're not impartial. They're saying Eidus something for their own gain. Why? Because the Ilay Amri Achi, if they're not going to testify on behalf of this person that claims that he bought this house, Amrinan Lahu, then we're going to say to these renters that rented from this person that the person you rented from was a Ganev. He wasn't the real owner. He wasn't your true landlord. Zilu havale age beisalahai. Now go pay your rent to this ma'are, this other person, the original owner that claims that it's still his. So of course they're testifying on behalf of this person that they rented from. So they're negei be'edus. So Amalei, Rav Ashi says, this is not a question. Daini de shvili daini hachi daini. Only judges that don't know how to paskin would paskin such a thing to accept this edus in a case where they're negei be'edus. You're right. Obviously, in such a case, if they already paid rent to this landlord and now they're going to be forced to pay rent a second time to the original owner that's not claiming that it's his, then of course they're negei be'edus. But over here, though, the case is Milo Yaskinon. Can't it be a case? They didn't pay the rent to this landlord yet. They're holding the rent of 3 years in their hands. They didn't pay the rent yet, and now they're saying we can pay rent to this person that we rented it from, or now that we see that there's someone else that's proving that he was the original owner, so we'll pay rent to him. Either way, so now they're impartial. So they can come and say eidos that they were there for 3 years, day and night. That we rented it from this person, and we were there for 3 years, day and night. That's the eidos.
The guy's gone if he rented someone else's house.
But true, but the fact that they rented it from him, they're saying eidos that he rented it to us, not the original Marakama, the owner that's being ma'arer now, and the Marakama that did not rent it to us was quiet all this time. So therefore, that's right. That itself is the chazaka. On the Mazutre says. So according to the Rashbam, there's different shatim over here, what the Mazutre is coming to say. So Mazutre, according to Rashbam, he's saying a statement for itself regarding the chazaka in a house, connected to what the Gemara said before. But Mazutre said, Iton ve'iton or Iton va'omar leisitrei sadi la sudile the darbet lashni v'imam balelia. If the original owner, the Marakame that's now challenging the ownership of this house, the one that's occupying the house now, the person that's occupying the house is saying, I was here for 3 years. And the Marakama that's being ma'arer says, bring me Adam that you were here in this house 3 years, day and night. Tanose taina. This claim, the fact that he's demanding this is a good, is something that we're going to have to prove now. That the one occupying the house is going to have to prove this. In other words, the point that Mazutra is saying is that what we said before, that you have to bring Eidos, that you were in the house day and night, that's only if the ma'arer demands this of you. Otherwise, if you're going to bring Eidos that you were there 3 years by day, that's enough. We're going to assume that you were there by night as well. If the ma'arer demands of you, befedish, that I suspect that you were there only by day and not by night, because daytime I was out working, and then every night when I came home to sleep, you left the house, so then that taina will be accepted. That's the Chiddush of Mazutre. It has to be with a taina. Without a taina, we're not going to demand of the machzik to bring Eidos that he was there day and night. Now, however, Mazutre will agree that if this ma'ara, this one that the original owner that's not challenging the ownership of the one that's in the field, if he's a reichel, he's a peddler that goes around cities to sell cosmetics for women, so he's not here living in his house on a permanent basis. He comes and goes. So in such a case, the Afagav Deloitan, even if he does not argue clearly that I want you to prove to me that you were here every day and night in this house, Tainina Le'anan, we're gonna taina this for him, because in such a case there's an actual very clear suspicion that the one that occupied this house only occupied it sporadically, or he was there by daytime sometimes, or by night. He wasn't there all the time, because he knows that the owner of this house is a peddler that's not there all the time. That's Rashi's pshat in this Gemara, or Rashbam rather. And when Taisus it says that, when it says here, it doesn't refer to the ma'arer, to the one that's challenging the ownership, but it refers to the machzik. If the machzik is a reichel, so then we're going to tie it to him and say that since you're a reichel, so then you weren't in the house all the time. You were here, but you left because you're a peddler and you only came sporadically into the house. So you have to prove that you were actually here 3 years all the time. Another thing the Gemara says, going back to what Rav Huna said before. Rav Huna said that you have to have a chazakeh in a field, in a house, ritzufais, straight. It can't be 1 day yeah, 1 day not, 1 year yeah, 1 year not. But a Maida Rav Huna will agree, bechanusa de mechuzah. In the stores of Mechuzah, in the city Mechuzah, that you don't have to be there in the store daytime and nighttime. Because this is made to be there during the day when you have the store hours. During the night, the store is closed, so you don't have to bring edus that you occupy the store by day and by night. Taisus over here says that this simple pshat of the Gemara is hard to understand because a store seems to be just like a field. Obviously, in a field, you don't have to prove that you were there by day and by night. What's the chiddush of the Gemara here? It's talking about a kind of store where it's a store. It's not a regular store. It's not like a regular storefront. It's like I would say today, it's like a store that a person has in his basement. So it is a store that a person sometimes is there by day. Well, he's always there by day when the store hours, but even by night, it's in his house. But nevertheless, even this kind of store in mechuzeh, you don't have to prove that you were there by day and by night. That's the chiddush of this case. Rami b'chame v'Rav Ukva b'chame Zoven ahiyamsa. They together in partnership bought a maid servant. Bahadi adadi together. So Mar ishtam mishpa. One of them used this maid servant. Rishayna shlishis v'chamishis. The first, third, and the fifth year. Umar ishtam mishpa shniya reviyis v'shishis. And the other one used the maid for the second, fourth, and sixth year. So they were changing off the time in the partnership of the usage of this maid. Nafak irilava. Now this challenge on the ownership of their acquisition of this maid came out. Someone brought proof that he owned this maid before, and he challenged, says, prove to me that you bought this maid from me. Okay, so now actually the Rosh over here says that the challenge to the ownership here was not the seller, because the Gemara starts off saying Zovan. They bought, it's clear that they bought, but now that seller apparently maybe was a ganav because someone else came along and said, you bought it from so and so. He's not a real seller. He really belonged to me. He brought Adam that he was the original owner of this maid, and I want you to show documentation that it was properly bought from me. So now the question is whether they can establish a chazakeh in the way they were using this maidservant, because none of them used the maidservant 3 years straight. It was 1 year him and 1 year the other. So Aslaka made it Rava, they came to Rava, Rava says to them, my time of this ahachi. Why did you do this that you changed off 1 year you and 1 year the other? Why not 3 years one and then 3 years the other? You did this so that one should not establish a chazakeh in this maidservant, and then the partnership will be forgotten. That one can say, oh, I'm here for 3 years, I'm using this maid that is for 3 years, so now it's all mine. That's why you did this, 1 year me and 1 year the other. So if so, he says, just like for you now, there's no chazakeh here. So so now for you to claim a chazakeh in the partnership of both of you, that I'm here 1 year and the other is here another year, so that together it should be considered a chazakeh against someone else that's coming and challenging this acquisition, this ownership of this maidservant, it doesn't work. Because this is like Rav Huna said, it's not a tzufais. 1 year one is being machzik, and 1 year the other one is being machzik. Says the Gemara, but v'loya maran, this is only said only in a case where there wasn't a clear shtar of the division of this, how this maidservant is going to be used, and this partnership was not written. But if they wrote a clear document that specifies the way it's going to be divided, that one uses 1 year and one uses the other year, kalesle. So then there's a clear rumor for this, that everyone knows that the one is using and the other is using, that this is a partnership, and therefore the chazakah does get combined from one to the other. The Gemara says similar later regarding when you have a person that buys a field and uses it for a year, then he sells the field to someone else, and that the next person uses it for a year, and the third person, if there's a shtar here, so then it does combine. So over here, if there's a clear shtar that they divided it between them, so then the chazakah will be 3 years. There's another opinion there's another few pshatim that Rashbam brings. Another pshat that Rashbam brings is that according to this, if they write a itra, so then it could be the chazakah would be established immediately. Because if you're writing a itra, you're writing this shtar that we're dividing the usage of this maid between us, that itself is expressing to everybody that we are the right owners. So the one that's now arguing that it says should have came and been moicha right away. Why didn't he protest against this right away? It's another pshat that Rashbam means. But the Rashbam says here the chazakah means 3 years. Omar Rava. Rava said another halacha, similar concept. Till now we're talking about in time, when you are machzik 1 year, you're not machzik another year, but now we're talking about the space of the field itself. Achla kula, if a person is occupying a field, and he plants and he eats the produce from the entire field, chutz mi beis reiva. But one area, beis reiva, a quarter of a kav of the field, he left empty, he didn't plant there. Kana kula, so he has proof, if he's there for 3 years, that he acquired the entire field, chutz mi beis reiva, besides that area that he left empty, that he didn't plant. So Rav Huna Bereder Rav Yeshua says about this, the fact that he left that area empty, so it's going to be excluded of the chazakah. That's only said, Elo, the bar or the bas zriyahi. That's the area that could have and should have been planted as well. So the fact that you kept it empty shows that that part you didn't buy. But if that area cannot be planted, it's rocky or it's not a quality of field that could be planted, then then you will acquire it together with the rest of the field. It will be proof, in other words, that you bought it together with the rest of the field. Maskeflor of Bava Basra asks on this. How can you make this distinction? So if that's the case, if you have a field that's very rocky or one big rock and you can't plant there at all, so how do you acquire this? Or how do you prove that you acquired it? There's actually somebody shining that say that over here it is discussing the actual chazakah to create a kinyan. There is the chazakah that's discussed in other places where the point of the chazakah is actually to establish or to create the kinyan. But the simple pshat of the Gemara here is that how do you prove your ownership if it's by using the field for 3 years, but here you can't plant for 3 years because it's a rock. Ella, the answer is you can't plant, but you can use it in other ways. You can bring their animals to be there, or you can spread out fruits, to dry fruits in that area. You can use it without planting. So if so, hachanami here as well, if you have a section in the field that cannot be planted, you can't say that it's going to be acquired or there's a proof of your ownership together with the rest of the field. You should have spread out fruits there or brought animals there to use that part of the field as well. And if you didn't, that part, that base roiva that you didn't use, is going to be excluded of your chazakah on this field.